Tonight at 10, Nigel Farage steps down as leader of UKIP. He says his political ambition has been achieved.
The leader of UKIP, Nigel Farage.
Less than a fortnight after the referendum, he said UKIP's greatest potential now lay in converting Labour voters, but that would be for his successor.
During the referendum campaign, I said, I want my country back. And what I'm saying today is I want my life back. And it begins right now. Thank you.
He insisted that EU nationals currently living in the UK should be allowed to stay with their rights guaranteed. And that view was supported by Andrea Leadsom, the latest MP to launch a campaign for the Conservative leadership.
I commit today to guaranteeing the rights of our EU friends who have already come here to live and work.
And tonight, Andrea Leadsom's leadership campaign has been backed by Boris Johnson. We'll have the latest. Also on the programme, Jeremy Corbyn's latest message to Labour members.
Only 9 months ago, I was very honoured to be elected leader of our party.
He insists he's staying on, but there'll be emergency talks with union leaders tomorrow to try to find a way ahead.
Tonight, I get dangerous. Not really dangerous.
Chris Evans resigns from Top Gear after one series. He says he's given it his best shot.
Gets it a match Murray.
Couldn't be simpler.
And at Wimbledon, a straight sets win takes Andy Murray through to the quarter-finals.
And coming up in Sports Day on BBC News, the 28th Tour de France stage win for the Manx missile. The man in green, Mark Cavendish, crosses the line first. Just.
Good evening. UKIP is looking for a new leader after Nigel Farage announced his resignation, saying that he'd achieved his goal of getting Britain out of the European Union. But he said the terms of Britain's exit were crucially important and insisted that EU nationals already living in the UK should be allowed to stay. And that view is supported by Andrea Leadsom, who launched her campaign for the Conservative leadership today. Ministers say, however, it's too early to be making that kind of promise, as our political editor Laura Koonsberg explains now.
Nervous? Nigel Farage? Well, it looked that way. Moments before, he was to reveal that his time was up.
The leader of UKIP, Nigel Farage.
Our vote to leave the EU gives him a place in history, but his main work, it is done.
I now feel that I've done my bit, that I couldn't possibly achieve more than we managed to get in that referendum, and so I feel it's right that I should now stand aside as leader of UKIP. During the referendum campaign, I said, I want my country back. And what I'm saying today is I want my life back. And it begins right now. Thank you.
But his parting shot? Ironically, for the man who's pushed to reduce immigration, a call for all 5 contenders to be the next Prime Minister to promise EU nationals already here can stay for good.
Everybody who has come to this country legally has fully protected rights. The fact that hereafter, we will have a different immigration system and not have an open door is a separate issue.
What happens to him, or her, or them, the 3 million EU migrants who've made their lives here, is becoming one of the first big tests of the contest to be the next Prime Minister. EU countries have consistently said we can't trade freely with them if their people can't move freely here. Andrea Leadsom, Tory minister, outer and wannabe Prime Minister, says whether from Portugal or Poland, Ireland or Italy, they should be allowed to stay.
I commit today to guaranteeing the rights of our EU friends who have already come here to live and work. We must give them certainty. There is no way they will be bargaining chips in our negotiations.
One of her Eurosceptic rivals, who also wants number 10, Liam Fox, the former Defence Secretary, said he'd like EU nationals to be able to stay, but stopped short of a guarantee.
What should happen in terms of nationals? Well, I would like us to come to a mutual decision that those who are already here have full rights to remain. And the reason that I would like to see that is I would want to see mutuality in that particular arrangement.
But the Foreign Secretary, who's backing the front runner, Theresa May, told me that firm promises can't yet be made.
Those who are saying today, no, we'll make a unilateral commitment that EU nationals can stay in the UK without extracting a matching promise that Brits in Spain are able to stay there, I think are selling our people out too cheap. We have to make sure that this is a reciprocal arrangement.
The Foreign Secretary's been talking to his counterparts around the continent and says we can't expect to control immigration and not lose out on trade.
There will be a trade-off, because the new political reality in Britain is that we cannot carry on with full freedom of movement as of right, as we've seen it in the past. And that will mean that we are not able to get full and unfettered access to the market.
What all the contenders for number 10 are grappling with is not just the question of why they believe they're the right person for the job, but how will they unpick and then reshape our relationship with the rest of the world? What happens to people from Spain, Poland or Portugal who are already here is the first big question. But there's no way, with complex negotiations ahead, that it will be the last.
It's like living in a zoo.
His political circus is now coming to an end. But the question he first posed now must be answered by many others. Nigel Farage, at last, can sit back and enjoy the ride. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, Nigel Farage has led UKIP for most of the past decade, transforming it from a fringe party into a significant political force. He said today that UKIP's best days were still to come, and its greatest potential, in his view, lay in attracting voters in traditional Labour areas. The party's new leader should be in place by the autumn. Our political correspondent Ben Wright has this report. There is some flashing images coming up.
Good morning, everybody.
The moment of victory.
The sun has risen on an independent, united kingdom.
And time to bow out. For 2 decades, Nigel Farage has had a mission: to lead Britain out of the EU. And while UKIP has just one MP at Westminster, the party's impact on politics has been huge, as the likely front-runner to replace Mr Farage made clear.
Probably one of the most influential politicians in the post-war era, not just of this century, because if it wasn't for Nigel Farage and the hard work that he's put in, and the UKIP activists who he's garnered, then we wouldn't have had a referendum on our membership of the European Union.
But UKIP is a fractious political family, and the party's only MP, Douglas Carswell, who does not want the top job, posted this symbol of smiling glee in response to Mr Farage's departure. A former city trader, Farage was a founder of UKIP in 1993 and soon distilled its pitch to a simple message.
What people are saying is get Britain out.
In 1999, he was elected to the European Parliament, a place he mocked and derided from the start.
You have the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk.
Ridiculing the institution, he wanted Britain to leave. But for years, UKIP could not break through with voters, and in 2006, David Cameron memorably mocked them.
I mean, UKIP, it's just a sort of, bunch of fruitcakes and loonies and closet racists, mostly.
A decade later, Nigel Farage would have the last laugh. With his fag-rattle chuckle and love of a drink, Farage is not like most politicians, but the jovial demeanour disguised serious intent. A seriousness that hardened after he was badly injured in a plane crash in 2010, an experience that spurred him on. And over the next 5 years, UKIP made huge strides, coming first in the European elections in 2014.
And Nigel Farage celebrated in a Westminster pub. Of course, UKIP's campaign against EU migration, the European Union, mainstream politicians was cutting through, not only winning over disillusioned Tories, but many working-class Labour voters as well. David Cameron promised an EU referendum, in part to head off the UKIP advance.
Today in Benfleet, Essex, where UKIP came second in the general election, some disappointment at Mr Farage's decision.
Well, I was shocked when you told me. I just, he's seems a nice guy, not scared to say what he wants.
I'm glad he's going, honestly, because especially the way he treated people in the EU when he went there, the way he spoke to people, it was disgusting.
Nigel Farage has resigned as UKIP leader before, twice, most recently, very briefly, in 2015. This time he says he's quit for good. A divisive rabble-rouser to some, a hero to others. UKIP without Nigel Farage will lose some of its colour. Where the party heads next without its public face and with the referendum done is a question for his successor. Ben Wright, BBC News, Westminster.
Let's go live to Westminster and talk to Laura Kuenssberg. So we have the UKIP leadership campaign underway and, of course, the Conservative campaign, Laura. And tonight, Andrea Leadsom securing some, well, high-profile support.
Indeed, and Tory MPs will begin the process of choosing not just their next leader, but our next Prime Minister when voting begins tomorrow. That will take place over the next few weeks and months. But tonight, as you say, Boris Johnson, who's of course out of the race, has made public his support for Andrea Leadsom. Now, she was one of the main faces of the Out campaign during the referendum, and giving his support to her, he said that she is able, she is kind and she is trustworthy. Surely he wasn't having a dig at his former friend, now deep foe, Michael Gove. But in this whole race, Tory MPs are not just watching the candidates, they're also watching each other, trying to work out where the balance of power will be, what will happen in the race, because people drop out as things proceed. And in terms of Andrea Leadsom herself, no question she has generated a lot of excitement on the Eurosceptic wing of the party. She packed a room this morning full of the Tory old guard. But I'm told that when she was addressing MPs in Parliament tonight, there were real doubts about her level of experience. One minister even said that, in fact, she crashed and burned. But another cabinet minister said to me today, it does now look at this stage that it will be Theresa May and Andrea Leadsom who are the two names on the ballot paper that then go to Tory members for them to make their decision. But you know, Hugh, politics, as ever in 2016, is always upside down and inside out. Just last week, it was the outers who were the victors. They were in the ascendance. Now they have lost their biggest name, and there are doubts about Mrs. Leadsom. The Remainers, who were on the losing side, have someone who was part of their camp, Theresa May, the Home Secretary, who's certainly out in front. But if we've learned anything in the last few months, this is an unpredictable business. Tory MPs will have a few weeks still to make up their mind. We'll all be watching.
Indeed, Laura. Thanks very much again. Laura Kuenssberg there for us at Westminster. Well, Labour's Deputy Leader Tom Watson is to hold urgent talks with trade union leaders tomorrow morning about Jeremy Corbyn's future as party leader. Mr Watson is said to have told Mr Corbyn this evening that he could not carry on as leader without the backing of Labour MPs who voted overwhelmingly last week in favour of a vote of no confidence. Mr Corbyn apparently said he had no intention of leaving. Our political correspondent Vicky Young has more details.
Resign, sir. Nice to see you all. Thank you so much for coming. Resign, sir.
Thank you, sir. Resignations are popular at Westminster right now, but the Labour leader's never been a follower of fashion.
You're going to resign, Mr Corbyn?
Jeremy Corbyn's under enormous pressure to go, but today he couldn't have been clearer.
Only 9 months ago, I was very honoured to be elected leader of our party.
Using social media to speak directly to his party, he said he was staying put.
I want to reach out to all our members, to all our supporters, to all our trade union affiliates, and to my colleagues in Parliament. Come together, now.
But many of his MPs are in no mood for compromise. Angela Eagles says she's ready to launch a leadership challenge.
I have the support to run and resolve this impasse, and I will do so if Jeremy doesn't take action soon. Now, that's all I've got to say.
Last week, more than 60 of Mr Corbyn's frontbench team walked out, urging him to resign. Then, in a vote of no confidence, more than 170 Labour MPs refused to back their leader. But his team say he was elected by 250,000 party members, and he's determined to carry on.
Order, order.
Which meant a grilling by a committee of MPs about allegations of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party.
Do you accept that Jewish groups and organisations are fearful, with you as the leader of the Labour Party, that you are fostering a period in the party where anti-Semitism exists?
I think that's deeply unfair and deeply wrong. It's absolutely the last thing I would want to do.
And what about calling members of Hezbollah and Hamas his friends?
Do you regard them as your friends?
No, it was inclusive language I used, which with hindsight I would rather not have used. The general point
So you regret using those words, that they're your friends?
I regret using those words, of course.
And they're no longer your friends?
I've done so on many occasions.
Throughout his leadership, Mr Corbyn has been buoyed by the enthusiastic support of thousands of party members. But inside Parliament, it's been a different story. Tonight, in a packed meeting room just upstairs, Labour MPs heard from their deputy leader, Tom Watson. He told them he'd been to see Mr Corbyn today to tell him he had to have the support of Labour MPs as well as Labour Party members. Tomorrow, Mr Watson will meet with union leaders to try to broker some kind of compromise. But he told MPs it was a last throw of the dice. And some MPs have already warned Jeremy Corbyn that the Labour Party could split if he insists on staying. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
6 men have been jailed for distributing drugs in fake ambulances. The judge at Birmingham Crown Court said the quantities of cocaine, heroin and ecstasy involved were truly colossal. The drugs, valued at more than £1 billion, were hidden inside Dutch ambulances which entered the UK through various ferry ports. Now, Chris Evans has announced that he is stepping down from presenting Top Gear after just one series. In a statement, he said he'd given it his best shot, but sometimes that wasn't enough. Viewing figures have steadily fallen to below 2 million viewers for that final episode, much lower than the audience for the old format, as our correspondent David Silito tells us.
Welcome to Top Gear with our all-new, improved audience.
When Chris Evans replaced Jeremy Clarkson as the face of Top Gear, it was never going to be easy. Jeremy Clarkson had turned the show into a global success story, and then he hit one of the show's producers. Chris Evans stepped in alongside former Friends star Matt LeBlanc.
Please welcome Matt LeBlanc!
But Chris Evans has lasted just one series. He's faced a stream of negative stories in the press and also allegations about his behaviour going back to the 90s.
Any plans for a second series?
This morning, he said nothing as he left Radio 2. A few hours later, he sent this tweet. He said he'd given it his best shot, but sometimes that's not enough. One Top Gear fan, who's also a former Stig, agrees.
I think it was an obvious consequence of the first show of the new series being bad. Now, the shows have got an awful lot better, but that was the key moment that the new show and Chris had to capture everybody, and they just did not get the first one right.
Right, there is now smoke in the car.
When you add in catch-up and repeats, that first show did draw 9 million viewers. Since then, figures have rather dipped. However, this is about more than just BBC Two on a Sunday.
It's a huge international brand, and for BBC Worldwide this is one of their most important programmes. They want it to perform well all across the world. It's a big money maker for them, so they'll be waiting to see what the impact is globally as well as in the UK. So I was sort of expecting Chris to stick around a little bit longer to see how it will go across the world.
130 foreign buyers have already taken the new show, so it will continue. Filming for the new series will begin in September. And Chris Evans will be back on air on Radio 2 tomorrow. But the world's biggest factual programme has, once again, lost its main presenter. David Silito, BBC News.
Now, this week we'll see the publication of the long-awaited report into the invasion of Iraq in 2003. The Chilcot inquiry, headed by Sir John Chilcot, will look at why Britain took part, the decision-making process before the invasion and during the conflict, and what lessons can be learned from the aftermath. Since the British and Americans withdrew, Iraq has been gripped by sectarian violence, which has allowed so-called Islamic State to expand. And yesterday, IS detonated suicide car bombs that killed at least 165 people in Baghdad. It followed the Iraqi army's success in driving IS out of the city of Fallujah. From Fallujah, our Middle East editor Jeremy Bowen sent this assessment of the state of Iraq today.
This is Fallujah. Losing this town so hurt the jihadists of Islamic State that they lashed out by massacring civilians in Baghdad. Iraq's perpetual war was caused by a chain of consequences that leads back to the invasion of 2003. Iraq's invaders, the US and Britain, removed a hated dictator and dissolved his army and state. But they made no real plan to rebuild the country they'd broken. They improvised and made matters worse. IS fighters still lie where they died in Fallujah streets. Jihadists weren't in Iraq before the invasion, and Shia and Sunni Muslims, whose sectarian civil war started during the occupation, could coexist.
Big bomb,
because there is a lot of ISS members here.
In this 13th year of war, elite units of the Iraqi army took the lead in Fallujah, helped by American airstrikes. One pulverized this IS compound.
I am going to show you
The bodies of more than a dozen jihadists lie rotting in the rubble.
their vest here with the
Suicide vest.
suicide vest, exactly.
So-called Islamic State grew out of Al-Qaeda, which took root in Iraq in the chaos that followed the invasion. Before they were killed, IS, also known as Daesh, had rigged a car for a suicide attack.
When you pull it, only pull it, it's a blow up.
So this is from a grenade?
Yeah. He just pull it and explodes, blow up all the vehicles with himself.
So this was intended for a suicide mission?
Yeah, exactly.
This car bomb wasn't used. After defeating Fallujah, IS put a much bigger one into Baghdad. In a suburban house, IS set up a prison. This isn't the only private jail in Iraq. In a fractured country, arbitrary imprisonment is a display of power. IS chained prisoners in cages the size of dog kennels. To get power and keep it, politicians and warlords in Iraq have exploited sectarian fears.
The jihadists of Islamic State would not have been able to take such a grip on Iraq without the sectarian conflict between Shia and Sunni Muslims. Now, the argument between Shia and Sunnis goes back 1400 years. But the invasion in 2003 had the effect of redefining and supercharging it for the 21st century.
Around 45,000 Sunnis are in a camp outside Fallujah, all displaced by the fighting and seen as potential IS sympathizers by Shia-led security forces. They get the basics for survival, but most aren't allowed into Baghdad. New families are still arriving. UNICEF says 1 in 5 Iraqi children, 3.6 million, are at serious risk because of the war. A bullet hit this girl as they escaped Fallujah. Witnesses at the camp said hundreds of men were taken away as they left the town and beaten by Shia militias looking for IS fighters. Hundreds are still missing. 4-year-old Huda is hoping her father will arrive to play with her in the tent. The men who were beaten are all too frightened to be identified. One of them said he saw Shia militiamen beat Huda's father to death.
One said the Shias have come for you. We will take 4 Sunnis for every man we have lost. They tortured him. I gave him some water. He drank it and died.
The camp is on edge. Police try to control food queues by firing into the air. Iraqis have often made matters worse for themselves. But mistakes made by the United States and Britain pushed Iraq down the road to catastrophe. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Fallujah.
The financial giant Standard Life Investments has suspended trading in one of its funds, the UK Real Estate Fund, which has £2.9 billion invested in UK property. It follows a sharp increase in requests by investors to sell their holdings in the fund following the referendum outcome. Let's talk to our business editor, Simon Jack. Simon, what explains the reasoning around this decision and indeed why people are being so nervous?
Well, Hugh, all funds keep a bit of ready cash on the side in case any old investor wants to say he or she wants their money back at any given time. Now, when lots of investors want their money back at the same time, you can exhaust that cash and then they have to start selling stuff to raise the cash to pay people back. And that is a problem, particularly if what you own is office blocks and commercial real estate. They're very, very hard to sell very quickly. Now, on its own, This is not a deafening alarm bell, but it comes on the back of the weakest construction data we've seen in 7 years, released this morning. We've seen house builders' shares slump. So there's just a bit of a fog, if you like, around the property market. And that includes, sucking in the banks as well. We've seen their shares fall. Some of those are down up to a third, because they're in the firing line if we have weakness in the property market. In fact, the boss of RBS today said he thought it would be an extra 2 years before people got their money back. So that's why people are a little nervous. Now, the Bank of England has been on the front foot about this. The Chancellor is meeting the bank bosses tomorrow. So they're saying we're prepared. We've got a few more tricks up our sleeves, and that's the good news. The banks, in particular, are in better shape than they were in 2008. They've said an interest rate cut might be around the corner. They might pump more money into the financial system. They'll be hoping that those inoculations, if you like, are enough to keep these sniffles turning nasty. But these are the first concrete signs we've seen of stress in the financial markets.
OK, Simon, once again, thanks very much. Simon Jack there. Now, the likely impact of Brexit is also being closely examined by senior figures in the NHS, who warn that recruitment could suffer. There are worries that filling doctors' and nurses' posts could be more difficult because of uncertainty over the outcome of negotiations with the EU, as our health editor Hugh Pym explains.
Staff from around the European Union are welcome in the NHS and essential for patient care. That was the message of these images on social media. But some are feeling uneasy about their position.
OK, so you brought the son from Italy with you?
Gosia from Poland has been in the UK for 12 years. She's a senior nurse training new recruits. Here a group from Italy who will go on the wards next week. She says the referendum result has made her think twice about staying in the UK.
The thought did cross my mind if things change, and I may have to leave. It will all depend how things develop and what's going to happen in the country.
Medical leaders say confusion over what Brexit will mean will make recruitment more difficult.
There certainly is increased uncertainty, which causes people to worry about whether the jobs that they're coming to are going to be secure. And we're already under a lot of pressure, so it just makes the situation worse.
Many hospitals are struggling to fill vacancies for doctors and nurses. Recruitment is a major challenge. Agency bills have been mounting. In recent decades, the NHS has relied on being able to attract staff from outside the UK. Of doctors registered to practice here, 11% qualified in other EU countries and 3 other members of the European single market, and 25% outside Europe. Nurses registered here include 5% trained in the European single market and 10% in other countries. After Brexit, the government could still recruit abroad or look for other solutions.
We could negotiate an agreement with the EU which allowed the flow of healthcare workers into the UK on a sustained basis. But one of the real weaknesses in the NHS over decades has been the failure to invest enough in training our own doctors and nurses.
And then we evaluate.
That's for the longer term. For now, Gosia and others from around the EU feel there are many unanswered questions. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Tennis, and at Wimbledon, Andy Murray is through to the quarter-finals after beating the Australian Nick Kyrgios in straight sets. 7-time Wimbledon champion Roger Federer is also through to the quarter-finals, as is the women's title holder Serena Williams. Rounding up all the day's action for us is Joe Wilson.
There's always a twist on tradition. Even at Wimbledon, the unpredictable is usually welcome. Nick Kyrgios is a tennis player who can sometimes beat himself. He's found plenty of trouble in his career, but in Andy Murray, he's always had a supporter. They like each other. Really. The first set was tight, the second wasn't, but some of the exchanges were a pleasure. It was fun for a while. For the first time this year, Murray was playing a man talented enough, theoretically, to beat him at Wimbledon. Problem was, Kyrgios wouldn't, or couldn't, get near him.
That's ridiculous for Murray.
Time is running out, reads one of his tattoos. Well, Nick Kyrgios is only 21, but he can seem infected by introspection. Kyrgios was going through the motions at times, said a watching John McEnroe. Well, for Murray, straightforward, straight sets, straight thumbs. So Andy Murray made it seem simple once again here on centre court, and reaching a Wimbledon quarter-final is an achievement. So imagine doing that 14 times in your career. That's Roger Federer. Nobody's reached the last 8 more times. Today he played American Steve Johnson, a fly to chase the ball whilst Federer waited to swat. Straight sets, energy conserved. Does he really look any older? Born 49 days after Federer, Serena. She's at a thoughtful stage. At 34 she still has great power, but progress is not always easy, especially when the court's a bit slippy. Drizzle closed the roof and Serena Williams was liberated against Svetlana Kuznetsova. 6-love in the second set. That's the story, no twist. Joe Wilson, BBC News, Wimbledon.
Georgia O'Keeffe was one of the most significant artists of the 20th century, the most popular female American artist of her time. Her works are rarely seen in the UK, but more than 100 paintings are going on display in a major new exhibition at London's Tate Modern. And our arts editor, Will Gompertz, has been to take a look.
This painting by Georgia O'Keeffe is typical of the work for which she became famous, a voluptuous, colourful image of a flower in bloom. There are plenty of other similar examples in this show, but that's not really what it's about. This exhibition seeks to reposition O'Keeffe as a pioneer who was not only the equal of her mid-century male contemporaries, but was perhaps one of the greatest painters of the modern era.
She was really against a gendered framing of her work, of herself. She really thought she wasn't a woman painter or a woman artist, she was an artist.
There was lots of chat, mainly from the blokes, about the great American novel, the great American poem, the great American painting. Mm-hmm. Very macho, very male, and yet here we have O'Keeffe, you could argue, doing, well, they're still all talking about it.
They were the progressives, and they wanted to make an American culture. So they were always talking about it. O'Keeffe felt they haven't seen the real America, and the real America is west of the Hudson.
She moves out to New Mexico and starts creating a new body of work inspired by the landscape. Is this the moment, do you think, that she makes the great American painting?
The moment that she really nails it is with those skull paintings, that this is a language uniquely her own. They've been related to surrealism, but really they're not really about surrealism. They're about what she calls the far away. That was the focus of her work, to represent America, to represent the American landscape, and to make what she calls the great American thing.
What is O'Keeffe's legacy?
She's an exemplar of how a woman was a pioneer and a foundational figure within modernism. So her legacy is enormous.
As frankly is this show, in which we see all sides of Georgia O'Keeffe. Will Gompertz, BBC News.
A quick reminder that Newsnight is on BBC Two. Here's Evan.
So many resignations in this country, so many vacancies. We'll focus on the Tory leadership race tonight and on UKIP. What future for the party with a Farage-sized hole left in the middle? Join me now on BBC Two, 11 p.m. in Scotland.
That's Newsnight with Evan. Here on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.